sadly our final talk of today's Hello Bio LabLife Conference, and we are delighted to welcome Dr Noelia Dominguez Falcon, who is a lecturer in biomedicine at the University of East Anglia. And Noelia will be talking about managing stress and anxiety and how we can support our well-being as scientists. So over to you, Noelia.
Thank you, Alice, for this really kind introduction. I feel a bit of pressure for being the last speaker of the day, but it's about well-being and stress management, so I'm hoping that it will be like a nice way to end the conference. So I'm going to share my slides. So thank you again, Alice, and the team at Hello Bio for inviting me for this talk. I'm very excited to be here. I collaborated with Hello Bio before, and it's been quite productive in terms of blog writing, so I'm really excited to be here. So like I said, today I'm going to be talking about how to manage the stress and anxiety in the lab, and basically a little bit of advice on how to break free from these intrusive thoughts. I have to make a small disclaimer for my talk because I think mental health is quite a personal thing. So I'm going to share my views and my advice based on my own personal experience, but this is not like a one-size-fits-all type of advice. I'm just hoping that it serves as an inspiration and perhaps spark a little bit of conversation maybe after my slides. So this is the index that I'm going to go through. Basically, what I'm going to talk about today is, first, I want you to get to know me a little bit because I guess none of you know who I am or where I'm coming from. Then I will be talking about why it's important to talk about mental health and this stigma around STEM careers. And this applies for every like step of the academic ladder. And then I will talk a little bit about my personal experience and different kind of like breaking points throughout my scientific career that kind of like not only allow me to sit with my feelings, but also being able to talk about them and give advice to other people. And then I will finish my talk telling you a little bit of sources of inspiration, which I think they are really important, especially if we think about the first networking talk that we have in this conference. So I think that's always quite nice to show to others. And then a few take-home messages for the evening. So first of all, get to know me. So like Alice said, my name is Noelia, and I am a lecturer in biomedicine at the School of Biological Sciences in Norwich in the UK. So I'm based in the East Coast, or as we call it, East Anglia. We have like beautiful landscapes. Everything is completely flat. There is no mountains whatsoever. There might be one or two, but everything is flat. So that's how everyone knows Norfolk. And the University of East Anglia is based on Norwich. So I lecture here in the biomedicine course, and I teach everything around the use of stem cells and the use of other techniques for biomedical research. But I also teach everything related to cell biology. And I'm also the social media officer for the school, and also I'm deputy senior advisor. So I actually deal with a lot of mental health issues coming from our students. These are two ways of contacting me if you want to. I'm more than happy to chat via email or Twitter or X, how you want to call it. And just so you know me a little bit more, I have hobbies outside of the lab, and this is outside of my teaching, and this is something that I did not used to have, and I think it was quite important to put it in like a mental health and well-being talk, if that makes sense. I love cooking. I spend a lot of my time in the kitchen. Kind of, I think it's maybe like a resemblance of my lab days, because now I mostly teach. I barely do any research anymore. I do a little bit with the research project students, but I'm mostly dedicated to teaching. So I love cooking. So you probably gathered by my accent, I'm not English, I'm Spanish. So as a Spanish person, I think we have a large tradition in cooking. I also like to have walks. So this is a picture of Norfolk. Like I said, it's very flat, and that's on the summer, so it's quite nice to see that kind of landscape. And I also love cycling. So on the weekends or on holidays and stuff, I go around with my bike because I really, really love it. So this is my scientific path so far. It's been a little bit different to what I used to think, but that's, I think, part of the journey as a scientist. So in 2012, I got my undergraduate degree in Spain, in my home country, and I did marine science. I was a little bit of a hippie back then. I loved, dolphins and whales and stuff, which has nothing to do with the degree that I actually did. We did a lot of maths and chemistry and physics. I loved it. When I finished that degree, I discovered that that path was not for me. I kind of like felt that it was not fit for my purpose. I was always interested, especially towards the middle part of my degree. I was really interested in how humans can be treated with natural products and with like tissue engineering and all those kind of concepts that they were not particularly expanded in my degree. That's why in 2014, I kind of like specialized and narrowed down my scientific path, and I got a master's by research in biomedicine. So that's how I started in the lab. That was my first lab experience. And my first lab experience was in industry, which has nothing to do with an academic environment. So I started sort of the other way around. But I loved it. It was quite insightful. And that's when I decided that my life was about science and I wanted to continue in that path. Unfortunately, there was not a lot of opportunities, money and job-wise in my country. So I took the decision of say goodbye. And then in 2015, I arrived to Norwich for a 6 months contract, but almost a decade later, I'm still here. So that kind of like shaped itself as well. So I wanted to do my PhD, but it was not possible at the time. So I spent 2 years in the lab working as a research technician, and I started a little bit to supervise students. And then later on, I got my PhD grant in 2017. So my PhD was about tissue engineering, but to regenerate tendons. So that was really interesting, and it's partly what I teach now in the biomedicine degree. And then I did a couple of postdocs, and I was always working in the School of Pharmacy, but I've always been like a biologist by training, and I've always loved teaching. Unfortunately, I was unsuccessful in 3 different fellowships, so for me it was quite hard to start to think about establishing myself as an early career researcher. I know these things are tough, but I've always loved teaching, and an opportunity came up in my actual department. So I took that lead because it felt kind of good. And then I got my lectureship last year, and I also got the status of the fellowship of Higher Education Academy, which is kind of like a certification that you obtain in the UK to be able to teach in all the universities across the UK. So that's a little bit about me. So you get to know what's been my path and how did I arrive here. Another thing that I do is a lot of science communication. I love to communicate my science, and this only came up to me around my PhD. I wanted to give a lot of talks so I could be more prepared for my Viva. And that was one of the best decisions that I took, because every possibility that I had, I just went there and talk about my research. And I also did a lot of science communication. I'm not going to talk about this today, but I've always been passionate about the role of female in science. So a couple of years ago, or 3 years ago, I founded my own podcast, which is called I Belong Here. It's available in Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you want to have a listen. And that allowed me to open a lot of opportunities for myself, including getting to know the people and the team at Hello Bio, writing blogs. I also won an award in my university for the engagement that it had. So lots of opportunities, and one of the reasons why I'm here today as well, because I love to talk about different things about the lab, not only inside, but also outside. So why talking about mental health in STEM is really important. Now, this is a really particularly interesting topic, because I think, as Pedro was saying beforehand in the conference, mental health and well-being are really important. But I don't know about you guys, but I have not heard about it that much. So it's something like people do not really talk about it enough. And I think one of the reasons about this is because of STEM or science stereotypes. So if you think about if someone that has nothing to do with science, the majority of the people will think about, like a crazy person inside the lab is usually like a male figure with like crazy hair, kind of like resembling Einstein, and then making like potions and things like that, which, to be honest, that image from the chemistry, health and safety purpose, it's not really compliant, if that makes sense. So I think one of the reasons about why there is not a lot of mental health talk in science is because of this stereotype about science being hard, and then, you know, like a discipline and a job that you need to be tough and you just need to, you know, in the nicest possible way, just suck it up and then just continue with it. This stereotype comes from, in my opinion, from early on, and depending on how we educate the next generations. So that was one of the aims behind my podcast. And one of the things that I try to teach now to our students is like, science is not about how you look like, it's about the impact that you make on your field and how you contribute to the scientific community. But from early on, I think now things are changing, but from early on, if you ask a kid to draw a scientist, it will mostly be a male figure, again, with like a crazy potion or a crazy discovery in their hands. Although while I was preparing this presentation, I found this study, and I put the reference if you want to have a look. This study is from 2018, but it's really interesting because it seems like, you know, from the 80s to 2016, so kind of closer to where we are now, the percentage of female scientists being drawn is actually increased. So that's really good. I think we are moving in the right direction. But what I'm trying to tell you guys with this slide is that I think these stereotypes about science being tough and hard is one of the reasons why it's still a stigma to talk about mental health among scientists, and actually most of the scientists will encounter mental health issues, especially at the lower academic ladder, especially students. Something that I also think it contributes to this is that, unfortunately, I think to the public, so when I say public, I say non-scientific audience, I think science always looks very inaccessible. It looks like sci-fi. When I tell my friends or to my partner what I did on my PhD, they look at me like, what? Like, you created what in the lab? And then obviously for us, it's extremely normal. And I think this image, sometimes I show this image to my students because sometimes we scientists talk about apples, but what the public receive is oranges or other fruits, you know, insert the fruit that you would like, mostly because we need to exercise that science communication exercise. And because science looks very inaccessible from the outside and englobing all these stereotypes, I think this is why mental health is still a stigma among us, and even not only for scientists, but even for us as lecturers now. I realize that all of us are stressed, and it's not something that we all talk about per se. So especially in academia, I think industry has other type of conditions and job progression. So I'm just going to focus in academia and academic environments. I think the way science and the academic environment is presented, sometimes it also contributes to mental health being a stigma. So unfortunately in academia, there is a lot of factors that contribute to mental health issues. And I think this kind of like feeds itself into the system. So when I started my scientific career in the lab, I was a master's student, so I was thinking about doing my PhD and possibly be a group leader or a lecturer one day, which it seemed ages away from me. And then one of my supervisors, he told me, well, if you want to be someone in science, you need to do really good science. It needs to be groundbreaking. You need to publish a lot, and those papers need to be better than anyone else. And then I look at him and I was like, how on earth I'm going to do that? Like, I'm only a little person in the entire world of people that are working in my field, you know? And I think this is something that puts so much pressure, especially in students, because I felt so nervous to, you know, do nothing in my career. I was like, well, how many papers do I need? How many grants do I need to have to be someone? And I think this is a massive mistake. And sometimes this is being talked about in also among us, among lecturers. Like, when someone asks you about your research, sometimes it's more about how many papers have you published rather than how are you contributing to your field. Like, tell me about your research. So this puts a massive pressure, especially in people that are at the bottom of the ladder. And unfortunately, this always relies on students. Instability and insecurity is also a big factor. So salaries are not really good, especially again for students. There is also uncertainty always about your job. I mean, I think since I've been in the UK, I've had like 11 different contracts, some of them like a month long, because this is how things roll. This puts a massive pressure on yourself. I've always been quite determined to follow, but not everyone is going to be like that. And lots of people can actually break down with this pressure. For example, when can I buy a house? When can I start a family if my contract is going to finish like next year? So this is a massive point of stress in a lot of people. Work-life balance as well. So how can you balance all the working hours that you need to publish all these papers, to be someone in science? How do I get that with a healthy lifestyle? This is also a big point of pressure among students, and also, to be honest, among everyone. And then family constraints as well. So if you are starting a family and you don't renew your contract, for example, in the city that you are in, can you really move to another city? Can you drag your family that they have also jobs? And if you have kids, maybe they are in the school or in, doing A-levels or preparing for university. And like I said, when do you start being a mom? When do you start being a dad? These are really important things that I think the system is not good at communicating to people, because with those pressures that I had only as a master's student, I think I was like 24 or 25, with all those pressures in, then how do you get people motivated? And this is something that I always try to tell my students. I want to motivate you to be a really good next generation of scientists, but not because you are going to publish a gazillion papers. It's only because you are going to do what you like and you are going to succeed at something that you love. But unfortunately, the system, I think, is a little bit broken in that sense. And we need more people, we need more role models, and we need more sources of inspiration to try to break these stigmas. Also, just to reinforce my point, there is actually studies. This study was published in Nature. This study was directed only for students. And then they interview students among the world, and then an alarming high percentage of people fairly often, for example, they feel stressed or unsettled at work. And then if you look at the right hand side of the slide, almost everyone, kind of like half between male and female, they suffer from anxiety or depression on a monthly basis, which I think is incredibly alarming, and it calls for action, and it calls for a change, which is not going to happen next week. It will take years. But I think the change comes from people, that we are already into the system and we have unfortunately seen what's out there and how we can educate the next generation of students or scientists to try to not get into the system already thinking that they are going to fail and be depressed. So like I said, in this talk, I wanted to share a little bit of my personal experience. Now, this might not be the same for everyone, but I'm just hoping to serve as a little pool of inspiration, and then we can have like a debate if you guys want to. So I've never talked about mental health and stress out loud before, because when I was a research technician in my previous lab, we did have a certain culture of you need to be here at all times, doing experiments at all times. And although no one was telling you off for being in the office, reading a paper because it's needed, there was a certain culture among the people of like, oh, you are not doing any work, or oh, it's 5 p.m. and you are going home. And it was this sort of air that was putting pressure on you to perform and to overwork to show that you were better, which at that point I didn't realize how bad that was because it's a very toxic culture. And now, after almost a decade here and now educating students, I know how bad that is. So the first time I was open to the idea of talking about mental health issues is thanks to the team of Hello Bio. They interviewed me first because of my podcast, and then they offered me to write a blog about anything that I wanted. They were quite understanding with the topic. And I thought, well, what if I talk about this? Because there was one particular week in my GSD that I went from the second floor to the ground floor. You know how it is. You have labs and you have rooms and freezers in every single floor of the building. And then I went down all the floors of my department, and then everyone that I found on the corridor was either running somewhere, stressed, not running like happily, it was stressed, or someone was about to break down because of a deadline, because of a talk, or because of something. And then when I went to the lab and I was by myself, I was like, why everyone is so stressed? Like, why everyone is feeling so down? And I was feeling down as well from other different reasons. So this blog kind of like fit really well in, but it was difficult because I wrote it quite openly. I was quite honest, and the Hello Bio team were absolutely amazing in allowing me that freedom. But once it was published, I was like, oh, maybe I should not have talked about those stuff, because I was quite honest with things that happened during my PhD that my supervisor had zero clue that this happened to me. So I felt a little bit ashamed of talking about these things, like, oof, people are going to think I'm crazy. I should have done just, get on with my science and then just forget about all this. And again, those are the feelings that the system kind of puts on you. And overall, I felt that I was exaggerating. I was, creating a big problem about something that was not really that bad. And I think this is one of the key issues with mental health issues among scientists. It doesn't matter what happens to you. It doesn't matter the feeling that you have. I think we need to educate ourselves that they are valid, and then we will do something about it, but not feel like I'm just going to scrape it off and then continue, culturing myself or going to this conference. I think we just need to take action as soon as possible. And then, even though this blog was about my own problems and my own stressful situations that I encounter in my PhD, I wanted people to read it. It had a lot of reads, so I'm quite happy about that. And I wanted people to feel a little bit related and feel like, oh, I also went through that. I can have some tips. I can have some advices. So one thing that I want to say is that the images, I hope you recognize who these two men are. So these images are not random. So if I go back one slide, the blog title is Under Pressure, Breaking Free from the Stress of Your PhD. So I love the band Queen and I love David Bowie. And kind of like the overarching aim of the blog was about the Under Pressure song, which is one of my favorite songs of all time. So for my presentation, I kind of like wanted to keep that aesthetic. So you will see images of these brilliant musicians. So one of the issues that I encountered throughout my PhD, and to be honest, it follows me now, even when I am now a lecturer, which we are supposed to have everything in place and be super top. And let me tell you that that's not how it is. We are all really stressed. We are all doubting about ourselves. So the first thing that I shared in this blog is imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome is basically you always feel like a fraud. You underestimate your achievements, like, oh, I got my lectureship, or I got my PhD, or I succeed at my Viva because I got lucky. So it's basically underestimating your achievements because you feel like they are not given to you because you are valued. It's because they didn't have anyone else to give the job, the talk, whatever. Especially since my first lab experience, I've been suffering imposter syndrome basically every day of my career, even to the point of my Viva. I barely had any corrections. It was a 400 pages long thesis, and my examiners told me that it was incredible. And still after my Viva, I was like, oh, maybe it's just because, they didn't have anything else to say. And this is the problem with imposter syndrome, that because we are our worst critics, we always kind of like tell ourselves the worst. It's very tiring. It's very mentally exhausting. We all suffer from it. Even professors, they suffer from it. Even professors after years and years of teaching, sometimes after a lecture, they will be like, oof, that lecture was so bad. They didn't like it, etc. So in my blog, and now to you guys, I propose to use it to our advantage. So what if we talk to our imposter syndrome and actually confront it? So some of the tips that I will share today is like, we need to look at the things from the bigger picture. So usually imposter syndrome is about really particular things, particularly achievements that happen in our life. So one of the things that I like to do with my imposter syndrome is actually look for evidence. So has someone, or have you read somewhere actual evidence of all those bad thoughts that you have? Has someone actually told you that, oh, we gave you the job because you got lucky? I hope no manager tells you that ever in your life, because that would be really bad. So look for evidence and see if you can actually find these thoughts that you have and you keep repeating to ourselves. Then I will say seek help, networking, like we talk about today in this conference. Seek for help. It doesn't have to be your lab or your actual work environment. You can seek for help everywhere. And something that it helped with me a lot is to take some time to be at pace with my feelings. So I think sometimes we kind of like really rush ourselves to feel a certain way at a certain timeline, and that's not how the human brain works at all. So something that I did during my PhD is to have 2 journals. One that was a sunshine or a happy journal, and one that was a sad one. So in the happy journal, I put emails, text messages. Even now I use it when I get emails from my students like, oh, I love your lecture, or, oh, you've been so helpful with my assignment. I put everything there. It could be an Excel sheet. I'm an old school person. I like to write things down. So it could be anything. And then when you feel like, oof, I got lucky in my Viva, or I only got this job because I got lucky, then refer to that journal. So then you can actually see like, well, if I did indeed got lucky, or I'm not valued, then why am I getting all these opinions from these lovely people that, to be honest, they don't have to lie to you. They don't have to fake anything. So that's a really good pattern that I use. And then speaking of patterns, when I use my sad journal is basically like a scrapbook where I write sentences about these thoughts, these intrusive thoughts that I have. So when you fill that journal for, like, let's say, a couple of months, you are going to see that certain sentences repeat themselves, because our brain always, when something is not really right, or we worry about something, at least my brain repeats always the same pattern of thoughts or fears or hesitations. And then one day I was reading through the sad journal and I saw like, oh, this sentence was the same this month and then the following week. Hence, it might not be really true. It might just be your brain trying to convince you of things that we are scared about. So I highly recommend this. This is a little quote that I put on the blog. I just wanted kind of like to emphasize it on the talk, but you guys can read it online if you wish. Here is David Bowie, one of the greatest musicians of all time. Sorry, I feel like I have to say this. Other thing that I encountered during my PhD, and I sometimes do it now as a lecturer, is overworking. So since I arrived to the UK, I can recall a weekend that I did not work in the lab. So I was always working every single weekend, bank holidays. I was missing holidays, trips to Spain, weekends with my friends, etc., because I had this culture of, oof, I need to produce a lot of data. I need to do this. I need to publish a paper. So, and the paper, the pressure comes from all the angles. It could be papers. It could be working a lot to get that promotion, to get a grant, etc. So some of the tips that I would like to share about this is that we are all different. We all walk our own path. And because, excuse me, that's my phone. And just because we kind of like have a particular goal in mind and someone else is overworking or is doing something completely different, it doesn't mean that you have to do the same. I never knew that I was going to leave my country and lecture in biomedicine, and my path has not been perhaps traditional, but it's valid nonetheless. Overwork also means sacrificing a lot of time of your life for science, and I love science. I think is one of the best decisions that I took in my life, and now teaching science, it fulfills me. But if we are not okay, we cannot do our job okay. And I think this culture of if you don't overwork and exhaust yourself, I think this culture has to stop. And like I said, this is not like one size fits all advice. I know that sometimes we need to work extra hours for that particular paper or for a deadline, but science is not our life. And this took me almost a decade to realize. Again, like another little quote from the blog, but you guys can read online. Grief. I want to put a little disclaimer because this is a sensitive topic. So I think all of us experience grief throughout our lives, sometimes several times. And I would like to say that this is something that not a lot of people talk about. So in my personal case, my grandma, which she was basically like my mom, she passed away in Christmas. So basically when this happened, I packed everything and I just had to leave because I was starting my PhD. And then I took the very bad decision of overworking, basically because I wanted to avoid any kind of feeling, any kind of thought. So I basically buried myself in 24/7 working. I was there every evening until 8 p.m. I was working every Saturday, every Sunday, to the point that I actually burned myself down, and I had to force myself to seek professional help because I took that decision kind of like with this culture of, well, it took me so long to have my PhD. Now I cannot fail. I cannot take time off. What kind of a student I will be if at the very start of my PhD, I take time off? No, that's really bad. My supervisor will never allow it. My supervisor had no idea that I was going through this, by the way. This is one of the first advice that I want to say. Seek for help to absolutely anyone that you think you can share your feelings with. In terms of the grief, I think prioritizing ourselves is the best way to go. We need to listen to our body and trust the process. It took me a few years to be able to talk about this openly, but by talking about it, you make yourself more relatable and you will help more people than you think. And then just to finish on a few notes, like I said, I think sources of inspiration are the best way to go, and not only the way we will inspire others, but also to break the system a little bit slowly. So you have tons of resources on the internet. For example, the British Science Association did a campaign a few years ago that is called Smashing Stereotypes. So there is like a lot of scientists across the world kind of like sharing their stories, and there is people from different backgrounds, from different job roles, and they are all online. So that's quite cool to see. A little bit of a spam. My podcast had that aim. So basically, my podcast was focused on female role models to kind of like enhance the role of female in science. And what I wanted to do was what I did was to interview female scientists across the globe, and then just to share the stories because they all went through different issues. We talk about motherhood in academia, we talk about mental health, we talk about cultural, religion constraints. So we talk about many different issues that all of us have. They are not talked about enough, and I think it's very important to exemplify that. And sometimes I try to tell that to my students as well, because now they are starting to think about where do I go. And as long as I am a teacher or a lecturer, I don't want any student thinking that they will not fit in because they need to meet certain standards that will carry mental health issues for them. So yeah, just a few take-home messages for you guys. You are the most important piece of the puzzle that is your life. It seems really cliche and kind of like a mug message, like positive message in a mug. But it is true, and you know, a decade later, I'm being able to give a talk about this. It doesn't matter which situation you are going through; it is valid. You need to validate your feelings, and then start to nurture yourself. And then once you are okay, then you can educate others. And then, like I said, it's very important. You know, sometimes these mental health issues, they are associated to a feeling, a body response. Our body is way smarter than we think, and we need to identify that. We need to sit with it and then take time to recover, and then obviously help others when we are feeling good with ourselves. Something you need to, I think is also important to find something that makes you smile outside of the lab, and then follow that. For me, it might be, like I said, the cooking or something else, and it actually helps me to not think about work and not actually doing anything related to my work. And I think once we try to educate ourselves and then think about that your life is about you, you need to grow, you need to discover yourself, you need to nurture yourself. Only once we are capable of that, and then we all help each other, then we can not only break the stigma of mental health in science, but also try to change the system a little bit. And I think this will only happen with collective effort. So yeah, I'm really thankful for being here today, closing the conference. It's kind of like a nice feeling. So yeah, thank you to everyone for listening to me, and for the Hello Bio team for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Noelia. That was a brilliant talk, and you've sparked a lot of discussion in the chat. So in our final couple of minutes, we probably have time for a couple of questions. I'm really sorry if we don't get to your question. I think this has been the most questions out of every talk. So a couple of people have asked, how would you advise setting boundaries with your supervisor about how much you're prepared to work, or if you have a very eager supervisor and they're insistent to the point that they're maybe texting you out of hours? What are your tips for setting boundaries in that situation?
I think if possible, the boundaries should be set as soon as you start. And now thinking about it, it might seem quite daunting, like, oh, I just started PhD, postdoc, whatever, and I'm already setting boundaries. It might seem really bad, but it is absolutely necessary. For example, when I started as a lecturer, one of the first things I did was to tell my students, like, unless you are in an emergency, I'm not replying to your emails in the evenings, and I'm not replying to emails on the weekends. And I felt rude. I was like, oh, these students are really not gonna like me, and I just started. But at the same time, it's like, it's you are the one who is doing the work. If you are not okay, you are going to have to take time off the lab, and then your supervisor needs to understand that. And this also took me a few years to say it out loud. If your supervisor doesn't respect you as a human, then it's not a good supervisor. And it took me years to realize this, because your supervisor is there to mentor you and to help you to become a good scientist, not a copy of him or her. And I'm so sorry for being so blunt, but it's, I think it's just, I see so many PhD students breaking down of pressure, like, because I work in the lab to the point of like having palpitations. And then now I think about it and it's like, why? Of course, I got a lot of papers during my PhD. I love my PhD. I love my thesis. I'm having it in my office, and now I see it now, and I love it. But it's your body, it's your health. So put the boundaries as soon as you can, and then if they don't respect you, you will have other people in your department that will help you for those rules to be respected. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, that's a brilliant answer. And another thing a couple of people have mentioned as well is imposter syndrome. So someone said, I see lots of my students suffering from imposter syndrome. Is it possible to help them to overcome it, or is it something that students can only learn themselves?
Undergrad students, you mean?
Yes. Yeah.
So something, I think it comes with the journey. So now as a lecturer, I do see that students carry a big pressure. The students that care about their future and about their marks and their future, the students that care, they carry a lot of responsibility, like, oh, if I don't have this particular mark, I'm not performing, or I got a 60 instead of a 90, hence I'm a bad student. I think the first thing we need to do as educators is to manage their expectations. When we manage a students' expectations, they will be way more realistic with what they can and what they will achieve. And then they will carry imposter syndrome nonetheless. So something that I've learned as well, being an educator, is that we are not moms and dads. So they need to pass their own grief. They need to go through that bad feeling before, like becoming their own person. And I think now the newer generations are being young adults for longer, because I see this in my students. I think there is certain delay. When I was 21, I didn't have the same issues as my 21s now. It's a completely different. I mean, this could be a whole new conference, so I'm not going to get into a lot of detail. I will say students like to know that they have a point of reference to go to.
Yeah.
So they know you're there. They might not approach you because the newer generations are also very timid in asking for help. But if they see, if they can see themselves reflected on you, they will approach you at their own time. So make yourself visible, make yourself approachable as well, and talk about what troubles you. Sometimes, especially as lecturers, students see us as, like, like Marvel superhero, that we have zero emotions and we are just like a block, and it's just completely the opposite.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic advice and a fantastic talk. Thank you so much, Noelia.
Thank you.